Hello, I'm Donald Leggett, and welcome to the latest Focus IR CEO interview. GreenRoc Mining CEO Stefan Bernstein attended the annual Raw Materials Summit held in Brussels last week, where, inspired by the EU's Critical Raw Materials Act, which came into law 2 months ago, the French and Italian governments each pledged €2 billion of critical materials funding and Germany €1 billion. Stefan Bernstein joins me to discuss all this now.
Hello, Don.
It's great to see you again, Stefan. It feels like no time at all since we've been having this discussion.
That's right. There's a constant flow of good news coming in the raw material sector.
It certainly is. Now, let me start by asking you to explain what is the annual Raw Materials Summit, please, Stefan, and explain to us how critical materials are now firmly top of the political agenda. Finally, but they are.
Yeah, indeed. So the Raw Materials Summit is organized by the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. This is the 6th annual Raw Materials Summit. So it's really a leading industrial event in Europe across the raw material sector, from exploration through mining, processing, manufacturing, and recycling. And
so it's pulling together all the stakeholders.
Exactly. So it's not only industry, it's also politicians, researchers, and analysts attending. And the critical raw materials that were top of the agenda this year, they were actually also last year, but even more so this year, is now the announcement that the EU has identified 17 strategic raw materials out of the 30-something critical raw materials, including lithium, graphite, rare earth elements, of course, copper, and even aluminium. And these are all of strategic importance to the to Europe.
So graphite has made it into the top 17. That's very exciting news.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay. The opening speaker was the EU Executive Vice President Maros Sefcovic, talking about the importance of a more resilient and diverse critical materials supply chain, with the Critical Raw Materials Act, or CRMA, now in place to make that happen. It came online in March, of course. What was his message to delegates? What did you take away from it?
Well, first of all, having such a high-ranking politician from the EU presenting there and welcoming is of course hugely important. It underlines the importance of the whole topic of the event, of course. Maros Sefcovic is also vice president for the European Green Deal, which is a policy making to make Europe reaching CO2 neutrality by 2050. And also there was a presentation by Iliana Ivanova, she is a EU Commissioner for Innovation Research and others. And it just shows how much political focus there now is on helping to secure the supply of these critical raw materials for the European industries and, of course, for all of the citizens in Europe.
And the very fact that the summit that's held in Brussels, I thought, was quite politically significant as well.
That's right. And another very important point is that now the Critical Raw Materials Act, which was proposed about a year ago, is now decided on and being implemented, which is like, I think, a record at record speed. In less than a year, all 27 member countries agreed on this, and it's really important because it has some concrete measures on how Europe establishes a secure supply chain of the raw materials, and it stipulates that by 2030, which is 6 years' time, minimum 10% of these critical raw materials have to come from EU member countries or associated countries. 40% of these critical raw materials have to be processed within those countries. And for graphite, this translates into about 100,000 tons of graphite concentrate have to be produced within Europe or associated countries by 2030. And more than 400,000 tons of graphite anode material. And today, the production of graphite concentrate is less than 10,000 tons. And anode material, 0.
I would have thought the dilemma for the EU is that it's simply not possible to actually produce those amounts within the EU. So they have to get the supply chains in place pretty darn quickly.
Absolutely. It's not impossible, but it certainly means that a lot of political and also financial support has to come in action.
Okay. The French, Italian and German governments, inspired by the CRMA, are to establish national programs to funnel capital into raw materials projects. France and Italy, 2 billion, roughly 2 billion euros. Germany, roughly 1 billion. What was the reaction to those announcements at the summit? What were people talking about?
Well, I mean, obviously it was received with a lot of excitement, expectations in the industry, and you can sort of gauge from how people were scrambling to get in contact with the presenters for these institutions. It is, and it's also quite concrete, particularly the German one, which has been announced a couple 3 months back, I think. They already now has set up a series of criteria to apply for such funding. So it's going to come in action pretty soon, and I think both the French and Italians are not far behind.
Okay, and moving on, both BMW and multinational automotive giant, I would say, Stellantis, spoke about responsible sourcing of raw materials and are considering buying raw materials direct from producers. So tell us all about that, Stefan. Tell us more.
Yeah, so BMW and Stellantis, and by the way, Stellantis is a united about, I think, 14 car brands, including Fiat, Peugeot, Opel, and several others. So they were presenting, and also large industry organizations such as the European Aluminium, Airbus, Wind Europe, and the European Defense Agency. And they are now actively seeking to secure the supplies of critical raw materials in a completely different manner than we saw just, I would say, a year back, where it seems that only price was the parameter that projects were gauged against. So I think with these new parameters introduced, of course, security of the supply, but also environmental footprint, social performance. I think with these, we see that raw materials industry in Europe is suddenly becoming quite competitive.
The CRMA has been a bit of a game changer. It's literally changing the way that companies have to think about their supply chain.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. As discussed previously, Stefan, we've done an entire interview around this before. The EU are now operating in partnership with Greenland, and as part of that process, considering how to help banks and investors fund the raw materials industry in Greenland. So what comes next on that whole funding point? Right.
So the European Union Greenland Partnership on Raw Materials was signed in November 2023, that is last year. And the importance of this agreement was underpinned by the visit that Ursula von der Leyen paid to Greenland in March this year. We are now seeing some concrete action also here. This fall, there's a business mission that will come to Greenland, and they will be meeting with the ministries, the parliament and industry also, and to discuss how European investors and public money can be brought in action to make some of these Greenlandic raw materials project be live.
But it is very positive. I mean, they're actually boots on the ground discussing how to make this happen, how to fund the raw materials industry in Greenland.
Exactly, and I think it's immensely important that these decision makers, both in the political space and in financial space, come to Greenland, see to themselves or for themselves that industrial activity in Greenland is possible, and you can see large construction projects now being carried out in Greenland with quite a lot of success. A big new harbor in Nuuk, a big new airport in Nuuk, and several other airports being built. So it actually makes Greenland come to life in a completely different way than if you were just sitting behind a desk, somewhere in Europe.
It's so true. And they'll realise that Amitsoq is actually in Southern Greenland, which is exactly the place to be.
That's right. It's a mild climate by Greenland standards.
Exactly, and it's easily accessible by sea. So who could ask for more? Okay, GreenRoc are developing 2 high-quality projects, high-grade graphite from the Amitsoq mine in Greenland and a battery-grade graphite processing plant capable of providing graphite for 1 million EV car batteries. But that's your vertically aligned project. So to what extent does everything we have discussed so far help GreenRoc fund its financing? Pull the strands together for us, if you will, Stefan.
Yes, I think we can benefit in two ways. First of all, there are concrete measures now being mounted in terms of providing capital for the upstream raw materials industry in Europe, as we've just been discussing. And I'm convinced that GreenRoc, we will be benefiting from that in the relatively near future, either from central funds or from national schemes. And the second one is the political benefit, and I think this is broad across all the member countries and also from associated and allied countries. They will result in national initiatives to welcome the raw materials industry and make the OEMs, that is our off-takers, think ahead to secure their supply of critical raw materials, which is immensely important, so that the market also recognizes us.
Okay. Do you see these national funds as sort of slightly competitive with each other, or are they all aligned and pulling in the same direction?
Well, I think maybe it's going too far to say that they are aligned, but I don't see that they will be competing for projects. As I more see them as being supplementing each other with the aim of making these become reality.
Broadly pulling in the same direction.
Yeah.
Okay. And my final question, as ever, why should GreenRoc Mining, ticker GROC, be on investors' watch lists? Tell us all, Stefan.
Well, first of all, GreenRoc has one of the world's best graphite deposits under development, and we are also developing the capacity to produce graphite anode material for the battery industry. The second one is that graphite is on the list of critical raw materials for all countries in the Western world. And then finally, GreenRoc is hugely undervalued relative to our resource and the business upsides. So that means that we're set to provide a very serious return on investment.
Stefan Bernstein, CEO at GreenRoc Mining, thank you very much indeed for talking to us about the influential Raw Materials Summit held last week in Brussels. For more company information and to access the company bulletin board, please go to the GreenRoc pages on London South East. And meanwhile, do follow us on Twitter. That would be @_FocusIR_ and @London South East. And, or rather, register on London South East YouTube to receive alerts to our next GreenRoc interview. All that remains for me to do is to thank you very much indeed for watching. Thank you.